Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into the fascinating, centuries-long relationship between morality, religion, and the economy. Have you ever caught yourself treating your bank account a little bit like your soul? Well, you were definitely in the right place. We're going to explore exactly how spiritual beliefs have subtly but completely wired the modern economic world we navigate every single day. Let's kick things off with a question that honestly sounds like the setup to a weird joke. What on earth connects an 18th century peasant, founding father Benjamin Franklin, and a modern-day social media influencer hawking lifestyle brands on TikTok? No idea? Well, the answer actually reveals the hidden forces driving human behavior. The connection lies entirely in how our concepts of the sacred and the profitable have just crashed into each other over time.
To unravel this mystery, we're going to trace this evolution across 4 distinct chapters. First up, the economy of morals. Second, faith birthed modern capitalism. Then, the sacred and profane. And finally, commodifying religion today.
All right, let's jump right into Chapter 1, the economy of morals. Way before modern capitalism and mass industrialization took over, something called the moral economy called the shots. Basically, systems of exchange weren't dictated by those impersonal, mathematical supply and demand graphs we're used to seeing. Instead, transactions were tightly governed by customary practice, community morals, and what's called a shared subsistence ethic. The golden rule was pretty straightforward. The community had to survive together, period. So, to picture this, imagine a severe famine hits a village. In a purely market-driven economy, a baker might just triple the price of bread because, hey, demand is up and supply is down, right? But in a moral economy, there's absolutely no way the community would allow that. Jacking up the price of basic survival was seen as a profound, unforgivable moral failure. The historian E.P. Thompson brought this to life brilliantly when he looked at 18th century English bread riots. What he found was that these rioters weren't just having these mindless, knee-jerk reactions to being hungry. Not at all. They were actually defending a deeply ingrained moral consensus. See, when local dealers engaged in what everyone agreed were illegitimate marketing practices, like, say, hoarding grain just to artificially inflate prices, the crowds would step up to protect their traditional rights. It was the outrage over a broken moral promise that triggered the riots just as much as the empty stomachs did.
And hey, this isn't just some dusty, forgotten concept from the 1700s. Politicians today, across the entire political spectrum, actually still use this exact moral economy framing. In the US, Bernie Sanders frequently calls for a moral economy when taking aim at wealth disparity. Down in Mexico, former President Andrés Manuel López Obrador even published a whole book titled Toward a Moral Economy to lay out an anti-corruption code of conduct. It's fascinating because leaders use this terminology neutrally to argue that our markets should still serve a fundamental shared human purpose. So next time you hear a politician talking about fairness in the market, just know they're tapping into a very ancient pre-industrial instinct.
Moving right along to Chapter 2, faith birthed modern capitalism. So, to really understand this massive shift from community survival to individual profit, we have to look at the legendary sociologist Max Weber, specifically his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. It's literally one of the most famous and provocative texts in all of sociology. Weber proposed something super radical for his time. He argued that the origins of capitalism required a powerful moral and emotional ethos, not just the right technology or material conditions. Simply put, factories alone didn't create capitalists. A totally new mindset had to come first.
Weber completely pushed back on the dominant theories of his day. Utilitarians were saying capitalism just sprang from simple human greed, the desire to maximize happiness. Marxists, on the other hand, argued it came strictly from the material mode of production, like the physical building of the machines. But Weber spotted a massive flaw in both arguments. He pointed out that the bourgeois capitalist mindset actually existed way before the factories were even built. The psychological drive had to be there first. Plus, those early capitalists weren't trying to maximize their happiness or lounge around in luxury. They were incredibly frugal and austere.
Weber traced this intense new rationality straight back to the Protestant ethic. Specifically, this ethic framed hard work, discipline, and frugality as a literal moral duty, a worldly calling. Imagine honestly believing that doing your everyday 9-to-5 job perfectly was exactly what God demanded of you to prove your spiritual worth. It wasn't about getting rich so you could buy a yacht and sip pina coladas. No, it was a divine duty to maximize your capital accumulation simply because doing your job well was considered an act of worship.
Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. It's this intense psychological domino effect. It all started with the Calvinist theology of predestination. which is this terrifying belief that God has already determined if you're going to heaven or hell, and absolutely nothing you do in life can change his mind. Throw in the fact that the practice of confession was scrapped, and just imagine the intense, overwhelming inner loneliness and anxiety that caused. People were completely alone in their cosmic fate. So to cope with that absolute dread, they frantically began looking for tangible signs in their daily lives that they were among the chosen elect. And what became the ultimate sign? Being a highly successful, disciplined person of property. Accumulating wealth literally became the psychological proof of God's favor.
This exact spirit of capitalism is perfectly captured by Benjamin Franklin's famous pre-industrial quote, "Time is money." Under this strictly regimented worldview, wasting time through idle talk, luxury, or just sleeping in wasn't just seen as lazy, it was deemed a severe moral failing. In this mindset, hitting the snooze button wasn't just unproductive, it was practically a one-way ticket to hell. You were literally laboring to be rich for God, not for your own comfort.
That brings us to Chapter 3, the sacred and profane.
Okay, so to understand how religion operates in our capitalist society today, we need to turn to another foundational sociologist, Emil Durkheim. Durkheim famously split the social world into two totally distinct, opposing realms. On one side, we've got the sacred. These are things that are exalted, holy, and collectively revered by society. On the flip side is the profane, the worldly, ordinary, routine stuff of everyday life. Think of a breathtaking stained glass window in a cathedral as the sacred, and your morning commute with a cup of coffee as the profane.
But Durkheim took this a step further. He believed that religion is, at its core, a social institution. Its main job isn't just to answer big spiritual questions, it's to create social cohesion and collective solidarity. By using shared symbols and rituals, religion basically binds individuals into one unified moral community. And here is the crucial part. Keeping the sacred and the profane strictly separated was the very social glue that maintained order. If you blur that line, society's shared values start to dilute, and the community fractures. So reverence for a sacred symbol is really, in essence, reverence for the society itself.
And finally, let's dive into Chapter 4, Commodifying Religion Today.
So what exactly happens when the relentless forces of modern capitalism, the very same capitalism born from religious anxiety centuries ago, start blurring Durkheim's neat little boundaries? Well, we can see this blur super clearly in contemporary Indonesia. Since it's a rapidly transforming, highly digitalized society, it's pretty much the perfect laboratory to see what happens when Durkheim's ancient boundaries crash headfirst into modern smartphones. And a recent sociological study analyzed exactly that.
What researchers found there is a massive blurring of the lines. Globalization and the digital world have caused sacred symbols to spill right over into the highly profane spaces of our daily scrolling. And hey, this is exactly where our modern-day TikTok influencer from the very beginning of our story enters the picture. We're seeing profound religious expressions popping up constantly on TikTok, Instagram, and huge commercial billboards. We're witnessing the massive rise of celebrity preachers and the outright commodification of digital dawah, or preaching content. Deep spiritual messages are now neatly packaged within the algorithm's cold logic of market engagement, brand sponsorships, and hitting that like button.
This directly leads us to the really fascinating concept of performative religiosity. Just look at how items like the hijab or modest Muslim fashion have evolved in this digital landscape. While they absolutely remain symbols of deep personal piety, they have simultaneously morphed into commodified fashion statements. Today, they can indicate modern lifestyle status, upward social mobility, and shifting market trends. The sacred has seamlessly merged with the highly visual, flashy aesthetics of consumerism. It creates this wild reality where outward appearance and branding often begin to compete directly with substantive spiritual meaning.
Take it a step further, and we see the sacred being strategically deployed in the ultimate profane realm, politics. During the 2014 and 2019 Indonesian elections, religious symbols were explicitly used in intense political campaigns. Rather than acting purely to generate inclusive spiritual cohesion, like Durkheim originally envisioned, the sacred was utilized as a rigid identity marker just to secure electoral power and mass support. It's a striking, clear-cut example of how modern actors can redefine the sacred to serve highly worldly political interests.
Which brings us right to the ultimate question that ties this entire explainer together. We've seen how the moral economy relied on a shared consensus just to survive. We've seen how terrifying religious anxiety accidentally built the engine of modern capitalism, and we've seen how that very capitalist engine is now commodifying the sacred symbols that used to bind us together. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. If the sacred can be seamlessly transformed into a market commodity and a political tool, what actually happens to the moral economy? Can a society really maintain a shared human consensus when everything, literally even the divine, has a price tag on it? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this complex crossroads today, and as always, keep questioning the structures around you.